Picture this. You're listening to your favourite podcast and suddenly a guest comes on who just grabs your attention. They're engaging, relatable, and by the end of the episode, you're thinking, I want to hear more from this person. That kind of present doesn't happen by accident. It comes from strategy, preparation, and understanding what makes someone unforgettable on audio. Today, I'm going to share the exact framework that transforms ordinary guests into podcast gold. Whether you're brand new or you've done a few interviews already, these strategies will help you to shine so brightly that hosts want you back and audiences actually remember you. So let's dive in and talk about how to become the ultimate podcast guest, one who doesn't just show up, but truly stands out. First, why does this even matter? Podcasting has absolutely exploded. There are millions of shows worldwide. But here's the thing. Being a podcast guest is still one of the most powerful ways to share your message. It's free, it builds credibility, and it puts your voice directly in someone's ear while they're driving, walking, or cooking dinner. Here's the catch, though. Most guests are forgettable. They wing it. They give generic answers and they fade into the background noise. But not you, and not after today. When you learn to shine as a podcast guest, a few things happen. Hosts start to reach out to you instead of you reaching out to them. Listeners start quoting your stories back to you, and you begin to build a genuine connection that can turn into long-term trust. It's not about talent or luck, it's about having a strategy, and that's exactly what we're covering today. I call this the SHINE framework. Each letter stands for a pillar that makes you unforgettable. Pillar 1, stories that stick. People don't remember bullet points, they remember stories. I once shared a personal story on a podcast about a challenge I faced, and weeks later, what listeners wrote to me about was not the practical tips I'd given, but about the story that I'd shared, and that's the power of storytelling. Let me give you an example about how powerful stories can be. A while back, I was invited onto a podcast where the host asked me about resilience. Now, I could have just said anything like, resilience is important because it helps you bounce back. That's true, but it's flat. Nobody remembers a line like that. So instead, I told this story. I described sitting at my kitchen table one night, staring at my laptop. The house was quiet. The only sound was the ticking of the clock on the wall. And I felt completely defeated. I just had another project collapse, and honestly, I just wanted to give up. I remember pushing my chair back, putting my head in my hands and thinking, maybe I'm not cut out for this. But then I shared the turning point, the tiny decision that changed everything. I got up, made myself a cup of tea, came back to the table, and instead of quitting, I wrote down one small action I could take the next morning. Just one. But that's what kept me moving. And when I finished telling the story on the podcast, the host went quiet for a moment and then said, felt like I was sitting right there with you at that table. That's the difference. Facts tell, but stories let people see, hear, and feel the moment with you. And that's what makes them unforgettable. Pillar 2, hooks that capture. You've got about 30 seconds to earn attention. Yes, only 30. But ultimate guests know how to open strong. Think about it. If you've ever started listening to a podcast and the guest began with a long list of credentials, how quickly did your mind wander? Hosts and audiences don't want a resume. They want a reason to lean in. That's where hooks come in. A hook is anything that disrupts the pattern and makes people stop and think. It could be bold, surprising, or even slightly provocative. For example, one of the best openings I ever heard was this. The biggest mistake I ever made in business was listening to the experts. Immediately, I was curious. What happened? Why? It sparked attention. Well, take this one. I failed at my first podcast so badly that my mum was the only listener for 6 months. Vulnerable, funny, and relatable, all in one. Here's the thing. Great hooks don't have to be shocking. They just need to be unexpected and connected to your message. Let me share a quick story with you. I once went on a podcast, and instead of starting with my background, I said, the hardest part about launching my first podcast wasn't the tech. It was the loneliness I felt when nobody listened. The host leaned in immediately because that wasn't the typical polished answer that they were expecting. It was real, it was human, and it led perfectly into the conversation about why connection matters so much in podcasting. So how do you create your hook? Perhaps you might try one of these approaches. Share a bold or counterintuitive statement like, the worst advice I ever got was to follow my passion. Or maybe start with vulnerability. I almost quit after my first 3 episodes because I thought no one cared. Or perhaps use curiosity. Most people think podcasting is all about talking, but I'll tell you why it's actually about listening. Take 5 minutes and write down 3 possible hooks that connect to your story. Practice saying them out loud and notice which one feels the most natural. Remember, your opening is your chance to earn attention. Make people lean in and say, tell me more. Number 3 is insight that illuminates. Anyone can give surface level advice. The guests who shine are the ones who share insights that make people think differently. Instead of work hard to be persistent, here's the 3-step routine I use when I feel like giving up. Could be used instead. Give people something concrete that they can try straight away. Think about what you've learned that goes against the grain. That's where your unique voice lives. Pillar 4, natural flow and energy. Podcasts are intimate. It's your voice in someone's earbuds. Ultimate guests know how to keep it conversational. Imagine you're talking with a friend over coffee. Use contractions. Let your personality show. Laugh if it fits. And here's a tip I use. Mirror the host's energy. If they're thoughtful, slow down. If they're high energy, lift your tone. It makes the exchange feel natural and connected. Great guests just don't answer questions. They build conversations. So pillar 5 is engagement and connection. Ask the host things too, which is quite within the realms of possibility. So ask the host, what's been your experience with that? That simple shift makes the interview feel alive. And don't forget the listeners. Say things like, if you're listening right now and nodding, or for those who would have felt this before, it brings people into the conversation instead of leaving them out on the sidelines. Now let's talk about the behind-the-scenes prep that sets ultimate guests apart. The best guests do their homework. They listen to at least 3 recent episodes, learn the host style, and understand the audience. This isn't about being perfect. It's about showing respect and making sure that you share is genuine and useful. And then there's your environment. Nothing screams amateur like bad audio or constant distractions. I'll give you an example. I had a guest recently who, from what I could tell, hadn't done many interviews before. During our recording, their dog kept barking and people were running in and out of the background trying to catch it. It simply broke the flow of the conversation, and honestly, I wasn't sure I'd even be able to edit it all out. I say that not to embarrass the guests, but to show how important environment is. Even if your content is amazing, distractions make it really hard for the host and the audience to stay engaged. So set yourself up well. Choose a quiet space. Let people in your house know you're recording and make sure pets are settled. It sounds really simple, but it's one of the biggest differences between sounding polished and professional or sounding totally unprepared. And here's another trick I use. Stand up if you can. It adds energy to your voice and makes you sound more confident. And finally, bring questions to the host. Yes, you're the guest, but curiosity goes both ways, you know. It's not bad to be asking the host questions. So let me save you some trouble now. Here are the mistakes I see most often. Number one is over-promotion. Nothing loses an audience faster than turning the interview into an ad. Audiences tune in for value, not commercials. And if you're all about pushing your product, people will tune out very quickly. Let me give you an example. I had a guest recently who had just launched a book. The problem was every time I asked a question, their response was, "That's what I speak about in the book." They kept holding the book up to the camera and circling back to it, but they never gave any real answers. Now imagine how that feels to the listener. You're hoping for insights, stories, something practical that you can take away. Instead, all you hear is, "Buy my book." It's frustrating, and for the host, it's uncomfortable too. You want the conversation to flow, but it keeps hitting a wall. The lesson here is simple. Value first, always. If you provide rich, memorable insights, the audience will naturally want to know more about you, your work, and yes, your book. Promotion takes care of itself when the value is there. Number two, giving generic answers. If your response could come from anyone, it won't land. Share your lived experience. Your voice is what makes it unique. Number three, not listening. Don't rush to your next point. Engage with the actual question being asked. And I'll be very honest here. It's not always that we're not listening. Sometimes it's that the question itself is long or multi-layered. I remember being on a podcast recently where the host asked this really detailed question with 3 different parts to it. I caught the first point, answered that, but by the time I'd finished, I couldn't remember the other 2. Now, in that moment, I felt totally awkward, like I should have remembered everything perfectly. But here's the truth. It's completely okay to pause and say, "That's a great question. Can you repeat the last part for me?" Listeners don't mind, and the host will actually appreciate your honesty. It shows that you're paying attention and want to give a thoughtful answer instead of bluffing your way through. So the lesson here is listen actively, but don't be afraid to clarify. Podcasting isn't about being flawless. It's about being real, present, and responsive. And finally, don't end weakly. Have a strong closing line ready, something memorable, something short, and something truly inspiring. So what can you do right now? Pick one podcast in your space and really study it. Notice what great guests do well and what others fall flat. Then start preparing your stories. Write them down. Practice them until they flow. Remember, being the ultimate podcast guest isn't about perfection. It's about preparation, presence, and connection. When you show up this way, you don't just give an interview, you create an experience people remember and share. So go out there, stand out and shine. The podcast world is waiting for your voice.